So this is going to be a quick who, what, where, when, why of networking. So one of the things that I have done in my career is done a lot of networking. I was in a job transition for about a year and a half, several years ago. So learned a lot about networking, and I'll tell you in a little bit about how I met George and asked him to participate in this event today. So a lot of networking, who can you network with? Well, a lot of people think about networking and job transition, but networking is really important to do all the time. And we'll have a slide talking about when you should do it. But who should you do it with? Well, a lot of people in large organizations do a lot of internal networking. I meet a lot of people when I'm networking with them, and they talk about how, oh, well, I know a lot of people in other departments, other divisions within my company. Very, very important. I think it's important politically, to know people and for people to know you. No matter really what size company you're in as well. So internal networking is obviously very, very important. Networking with customers and vendors, it's good. People know other people. So it's really good to have those opportunities to talk to people that you're doing business with and understand who they know and who they work with. I meet lots of people that way. Networking with friends and family. I think one of the things often ignored, I know when I went through job transition, there were people would say, well, talk to that guy Joe next door. You talk to him about something going on in the neighborhood, see who he knows. It's amazing who people know. Sometimes there's a relative that has a position in a company. If you're interested in a job transition or just interested in learning more about a particular industry or something like that, ask Uncle Charlie. It's always good to do that. And then obviously there's the usual attorneys, bankers, insurance people, accountants. Those are all people that work with lots of different businesses, especially in your local community oftentimes, especially if you're trying to network locally. And then obviously, I don't want to forget saying networking with FEI members, locally and nationally. And there's lots of opportunities to do so these days in the virtual world that we're kind of living in. So I'm going to try to get to the next slide here. I don't know how to, oh, there we go. Okay, I guess it just takes a minute. So networking what? So lots of reasons to network, lots of things you can do with networking. It's all about, oh, my slide's jumping around here. So things like introductions to people that you should know, that you don't already know. That's a good reason to network. Opportunity to give back. It's great to be able to help other people when you know people that could help them get introduced to people they're trying to connect with. Keeping up on local industry news is really important, and things going on in your local world and just the community that you live in. It's also good to practice your personal brand if you're trying to make a transition to a different career or something like that. It's really great to be able to network with people and kind of practice. Talk about your employer, talk about what they bring to the marketplace, and practice that in front of other people, especially if you're in a business development type role or new to that type of work. You can learn a lot about what's happening in companies in terms of what job openings might be coming up. A lot of times you hear, you're not going to get a job through necessarily LinkedIn or one of the job sites. You're going to find out about it through that internal network that you've built, where people know about these jobs before they even in fact get posted. So it's through a lot of that networking that you can do to just know what's going on in certain businesses that you're interested in possibly working in, or just businesses you want to learn more about that are really impacting the community, and maybe something that could be even a not-for-profit that you're interested in possibly getting on the board of and want to get more involved locally in the community to start to learn more about their mission and their values and things like that. And then I think it's also important about just being able to understand and network with folks when you have a need to understand something that you're dealing with, an issue in your company, and you're trying to figure out how to resolve something and what next steps you should take. So you might have an opportunity to network with people who work in similar roles, such as being a CFO or a controller or whatever in finance. It could be in operations. So working in those roles, how they've dealt with those issues in the past. A lot of times you can sort of have an informal network of people that you get together with, whether it's informally or formally. So that's another way, another reason to network and how you can network. So where should you network? Well, this is really fun because a lot of times it happens in places you wouldn't expect. like the grocery store, when you're out shopping, when you're out playing ball or something, you run into people. So it really is important. My slide keeps jumping. There we go. Virtual is obviously a great option these days. You can meet a lot of people in a pretty quick amount of time if you schedule Zoom calls with them. So that's a good way to connect, to meet people. You know, I love the in-person over coffee or lunch. So that's definitely something that I really enjoy. I think you can get to know a lot about a person when you meet them in person. That's a little bit different. Phone calls are not really recommended. I think it's difficult to be able to actually pay attention, be thinking about what you want to say to the person you know you're on the call. If it's the only way to connect, at least you're connecting. But I would say it's probably not my preferred method of connecting. And then really, as I mentioned, most networking is planned. You plan to have a call, you have a meeting because people are all busy, but sometimes things just happen in an unplanned location or moment. So you really need to always be ready. You never know who you're going to run into when you go somewhere, someone at your church, someone at your kid's school, or something like that, that might actually have a massive impact on your future life. I'm just waiting for my slide to advance here. And when should you network? All the time. So think about that. You should be thinking about networking every single day, every single hour. And unfortunately, too often, we focus on networking during a time of job transition. And so I know a lot of people on the call today are not necessarily in job transition. So really think about it in different ways throughout your life. And it can be personal networking, it can be business networking. It's not just always business networking. It's, I got an email last night from a person in my HOA, and they were like, hey, I want to redo my driveway. Does anybody know somebody, you know, who can, they could recommend? That's networking. You may not think about it that way, but it is, you know, or someone, your neighbor asks you, hey, I saw a guy painting your house. Did he do a good job? Would you recommend him? All of those personal referrals, that's all really networking. Obviously, career management is really a lifelong pursuit. So you want to continue to broaden your knowledge of your industry and your profession. So networking is a great way to really start to understand different things about what you could be facing in the future in your career, the direction and paths and tweaks you want to make as you go along the journey. Talking to other people who have a background in that industry or a background in that profession is a great thing to do throughout your career, not just at the beginning of the career and not just in the middle of your career. When facing issues, as I mentioned earlier, that you have not dealt with before, that's a really important way to network. You might learn best practices that you could employ at your business. You might be able to share those with other people as well and add value to their situation. And oftentimes I tell people, network sometimes when it's not convenient. You know, we all have a lot going on. We have stuff going on with our family, with our friends, with our job. And sometimes it's not the best time to meet somebody. And you're like, oh my gosh, I got to do this thing at work and I really don't have time to talk to that person. But I'll tell you, it's making an investment, and investments take time, but they pay dividends over the long run. So really, really important to do that. So my last slide is networking how. So George is going to cover a lot of these topics. I'll touch on just a few of them that I have put together here. So one of them is use LinkedIn and other social media tools. I'm sure you're trying to do that or doing that in your networking. I always try to look up people ahead of time before I meet with them to find some kind of a commonality that I can share and say, oh, I think we both know the same person. We're both connected to, you know, so-and-so. Or, oh, I think we both speak Thai or speak German or something like that. So I think from that perspective, it's just a way to kind of break the ice and find some commonality with someone, especially if they work in maybe a different type of industry than you do. And you may feel like, wow, I don't really know why I'm connecting with this person. I don't feel like I have anything in common with them. And you may find just, you know, the simplest little things really make that personal connection. Try to keep the meeting to 20 minutes. Make sure you read Marsha Ballinger's book, The 20-Minute Networking Guide. It's just a fantastic little booklet she wrote a long time ago. And, if the meeting's going well, you can say, hey, do you have 10 more minutes? I kind of wanted to talk about one more thing or ask you one more thing. But try to keep it brief. Have a concise way of describing yourself and your background. So sometimes I sit down with people and they can't even really explain where they are in their life and what they're trying to do. And so I kind of feel like I have to kind of pull it out of them. And it's important to be able to sort of have that ready to go. Give the person a clear ask. If you're meeting with someone and you're trying to get some information, be clear in what you'd like them to help you with, because sometimes it's hard to understand what someone needs. And if they can have a clear ask for you, I think that makes it easier. Make sure you always thank people for their time. Time is so precious these days. And I always offer to help people. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. And there are many things that all of us can do to help each other. I think when I was first in job transition and I was meeting with lots of vice presidents and presidents of companies, I thought, gosh, what the heck could I do for them? And I was more junior in my career. And it's amazing the things that you can, people that that you can connect people to. It's amazing what you can do to help other people. And make sure to follow up with people. Oftentimes I'll meet with people and they'll be like, yeah, okay, that's great. And, I'll get back to you, I'll let you know, whether they're job transition or something. And I just tell people, hey, let me know what happened. I want to know if the advice I gave you helped you out. What was sort of the end of the story? So I like to always encourage people to do that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce George Murray. I want to tell you for just a minute how I know George and sort of what led to this. So George and I met back in 2018. I was in job transition. He was in job transition. And he had actually just left a company that I had interviewed at. So it was kind of interesting. He was kind of on my list of people to connect with to learn more about that company. So that's actually kind of how we first got to know each other. You remember that, George, at Worth? And so that's how we first got to know each other. But then when I got to speak with George, I was honored to be in his presence. I will tell you, he is such a great networker. He is so professional. He brings such energy to everything that he does. He's just such a model for really someone who you just have so much respect for. And when I read his LinkedIn background, and you should all check it out, I learned a lot of things about him that I felt really explained some of his behavior and his traits. He was in the military for 8 years in the Army, was a specialist. He brings such a lot of, I guess I'll call it self-control and just a lot of discipline to everything that he does, which I think is really a great model. He comes from the operations world, which is very different. I don't know too many operations people. So it was interesting to meet him and kind of hear about what he's been able to do in different organizations he's worked in. He's worked internationally in Germany, in Iraq, and different parts of the Middle East in his Army days. But he also brings an amazing ability to connect with people. And you leave the meeting with him feeling so honored that you had an opportunity to hear about his techniques for how he networks and his abilities to really connect with people. So right now he's at Onto Innovation and he's a vice president. It's a semiconductor business. So he's the vice president of operations. So he's doing all of this book writing and speaking and volunteering to help people despite a full-time job. So the guy's got a ton of energy. And if you ever go on LinkedIn, you'll oftentimes see some little videos that he's posted, him taking a walk or exercising or whatever. So he has a good work ethic and a really good life balance. So I hope you'll enjoy, I know you'll enjoy his presentation today. And I thank you so much, George, for joining us today at FEI and speaking about the book that you've written and some of your techniques for networking. I'm sure everyone's going to really enjoy it.
Wow. Karen, I thought you were talking about somebody I didn't even know. I really appreciate that introduction. The check's in the mail, by the way. Again, thank you for asking me to speak. For those who don't know, I was in my first career transition in 2016 So I myself did not know anything about networking, didn't even know how to spell the word, let alone actually do it. So I think it's a learned practice that everybody can learn. You just have to turn around and be open and willing. And even if you are an introvert, and we'll get into that shortly, there's a process that you can get into the pool without getting tossed into the deep end. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a holler when you see it.
Good.
All right. So what is Uber networking? Well, I would say it's a little bit beyond just the casual, hello, how you been, what have you been doing once per year. And I do tell you that I found networking to be helpful, not only in career transition, but also more importantly, when you have landed an opportunity, because it helps, to Karen's earlier point, in so many ways. You know, whether you're looking for somebody to paint the insides of your house and you want a quality person at a relatively good cost, reach out to your network. You know, if you're looking for best advice as far as a restaurant to visit at a particular price point, always reach out to your network. I found probably some of the best restaurants through my network that I would have never realized or heard, especially traveling. So kind of go over, let me see here, the agenda. So first, I want to talk to a few of the people just briefly on the stages of transition and where you might be at to help you progress. Because one of the things that I've been doing is actually talking about very passionately about career transition and a process of networking, which will help you land your opportunities faster. And just kind of figure out where people are in that particular journey. Because the workshop that I actually have started actually will be a part of the Minneapolis Community College now moving forward in the month of April, which I'm excited about. And again, how did I find about the opportunity? Networking. Somebody introduced me to somebody else. They had been part of the first workshop I had in January, introduced me to one of the directors there, and hence they reached out to me, went through the process, and they hired me as an instructor, all through networking. So we'll define networking, get to our brand. You know, one of the things before I even got into my first career transition was, what is this branding all about? I thought it was all about a product, a service, or a company. Why would I need a brand? And then value proposition over an elevator pitch. I know a lot of people may have heard the old elevator pitch. I know Karen and I have heard painfully a lot of them through the years, and we'll talk about that. And then of course, we'll walk through the rest of the products and rest of the topics and come to the summary. And at any time that you guys have any questions or whatever, you might want to just throw them in the chat box and we'll be able to turn around and answer those as we progress through the meeting. So. All right, why am I not working? All right, so briefly, what I have found is that I'm sure we've all seen these kind of models, the fear of speaking, the 3 stages of fear of speaking. So when I went and looked out on the website, there was no really 3 stages process of career transition. And if you find yourself in career transition at any particular point in time or in the future, these are the stages that you got to look forward to. And so lost stage is really answering all those questions to turn around and try to get out of that stage as quickly as possible, because that will help you progress your career transition to your next opportunity. Then of course, the transformation stage is really kind of to Karen's earlier point, knowing my ask, you know, briefly introducing myself in the most positive way that will come off to the listener of something that they may resonate with, or they may know somebody that needs that product or service or value that you're presenting. We'll also talk briefly about how personal board of advisors are so important, not only in career transition, but also as you progress through your career in general. These are people, that 3 to 5 people that can really help you launch whatever particular process in addition to your day job. They may even help you in your day job if you're looking for a particular vendor or service or whatever. Reach out to your personal board of advisors. And then finally, we want to get you into the confidence stage as quickly as possible so that you can project that confidence not arrogance, but confidence that will land you your next opportunity faster. And this is all in the workshop that we help people just transition through quickly as possible to land their next opportunity faster. So, what is networking? In addition to all of what Karen talked about, it's definitely not just about connections. And I'm sure that we've all realized these people. They come and they connect on LinkedIn and they hit the connect. They don't even actually have the effort to turn around and say, gee, I'm George Murray. I'm a recently transitioning executive where I take flat to declining companies and I turn them around on the top and bottom line. Because you've only got 300 characters to make a first impression when you reach out, cold calling. But how many of those connections that just hit connect that you've connected with, and you literally go back and look at the message history and they've never once responded back to you, and they never really actually added any value to your network? It's not a one and done. So you're meeting somebody for the first time, you've been introduced based upon the criteria you've outlined. You want to make sure that you're doing more than just a general introduction. And then the next time I've seen you is maybe 5 or 6 years from now, either if you're in career transition or if you need something. And it's not all about you. So a lot of things that people, especially in career transition, it struggles with is I'm going to talk to somebody that potentially can hire me. And the first thing I'm going to do is stick a resume in front of their face and talk about the opportunities that they may have in common. So that's definitely not networking. And that will basically put you in the two forms of categories that you may or may not have heard of, like Ann Pryor and Lenny Newman, great networkers. There is the terminology called TUGs, takers, users, givers, and sharers, right? And I'm sure we've all found the takers and users. They always reach out to you and say, can you introduce me? And you've really not met this person, right? You don't definitely want to be in that category because your network group will actually constrict versus grow and thrive. So again, it's not always about you and how awesome you may be. So what is networking? So it's really about truly finding ways to connect. And Karen actually talked about it earlier. Doing your homework the night before, and we'll talk about that. Really trying to find a general common interest. Maybe it's somebody that has introduced you, from somebody that you know very well. You want to make sure that you come off as your best self, and you actually not only presenting yourself, but you're also presenting the brand that potentially maybe Karen has introduced you to. So you've got an obligation. Common interests. So again, finding ways, doing your homework, we'll talk about that, but it's really trying to find a way to connect beyond just the general introduction. I can tell you in my 5 years since being in my first career transition, a lot of the connections that I've made have been really lifelong friends, people that I meet on a cadence basis. Like, for example, Lenny Newman, everybody knows Lenny, CFO type that just did a career pivot and working for Blacik. This gentleman I've known for more than 4.5 years, and now we've had for quite a long time a Sunday morning standing video call, 30 minutes. What's going on in your life? What's going on in my life? Anything I can help you with? And we move forward. But that's how networking can really help, not only in the most difficult times, but also in the day-to-day life. And then solutions and values. Maybe, again, we talked about, maybe you're looking for somebody in your current company, right? A way to find and help save money is to reduce recruiter fees and reach out to your network. You're going to have more input from somebody that's going to say, listen, I think you should talk to Sally. Sally's a great accountant. She can turn around and come in your organization and really add value quickly. Those are the opportunities through networking that can help. They can also help you get the right person, the right fit, as well as help you reduce your costs. So I'm getting my notes here. And then finally, it's developing relationships, right, over time. So for example, I reached out, one of my activities over this past couple of months was to reach out to 10 CEOs of major organizations for the next 10 weeks. Just picking 10, doing a cold call introduction. And over time, I've developed a really great relationship with the CEO of Siemens USA. She runs a $1 billion organization, and I reached out just a very general, hey, how are things going for you? I'm interested in learning more about the company. And ironically enough, a couple of days later, she connected with me. And over the period of the next 2 months, we had email chats, we had a phone call, but that was all about developing a relationship. And that can definitely help you in your future. So what you're doing is not just looking at today and how things can help you today, but how you can add value to people, how you can help them, and in turn, help yourself. One of the great networking folks that I met in my first career transition, Greg Rye, told me, he said, George, what I have found in all the time that I've talked with networking, and I've been doing it for quite some time, is the more you give, the more you get. And that is true within networking. So first thing is first, who are you? So I can tell you, when you come across and you're introducing yourself, it's important for you to really understand who you are and to add value and basically introduce yourself in the most positive and enthusiastic way that adds value to the potential listener. So it really talks about doing your homework, being different. What makes you unique and special? If you're all CFOs in the groups, right? I always imagine when I was in career transition, there's 8 VPs of ops that are looking to introduce or to actually interview for this opportunity. So I'm going to have to be able to say something different than anybody else, right? And I'm sure that you've interviewed a lot of people where they come off and they have this standard introduction that sounds like everybody else. I call it the Charlie Brown teacher introduction, right? I'm an operations executive that has 20 years experience with an MBA. Wah, 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 wah. I sound like every other VP, right? So you've got to come off and make yourself different and find something that can resonate with that person. And what I always tell people is that please don't use an elevator pitch, because an elevator pitch is all about what you've done. And if you've not done the homework the night before on the individual that you're networking with, you can definitely miss a great opportunity, whether it's just truly connecting and adding value to that person. And then later on in the future, when you need some help, that person in turn helps you. But it all comes down to a value proposition. And to me, a value proposition is 30 seconds or less. How do you initially introduce yourself that adds value to the individual, that actually resonate to something that they may need help with or assistance, or know somebody that needs your service, your product, your inputs, etc. So here's the difference. We already talked about the kind of Charlie Brown's response, right? I have a couple of value propositions depending on who I'm talking to. And these 30-second introductions that I've developed over time take a couple hours. So don't feel that a 30-second value proposition gets frustrating after 5 minutes of not being able to create it. So depending on who I talk to, generally peers, I tell them, when they say, tell me about yourself, George, I say, I'm an executive that takes flat to declining companies. I turn them around on the top and the bottom line while injecting a more equally accountable work culture. Do you know anybody that needs somebody like that? That's the top, the bottom line, and the culture. And I can tell you in the last 10 years, I've been interviewing companies. That's the 3 major problems of companies. So if you're potentially in career transition, that comes off with somebody that says, hey, you know what? I do know somebody that's having problems with their top line. Tell me more. You zeroed right in because you've done the homework on the night before. So again, at the end of this process, really try to be yourself, because this is the whole terminology I tell people is that depending if you're in career transition or you're introducing yourself, a lot of people tend to come off with a standard introduction about themselves, about maybe how years experience, maybe, you know, what their title is and everything. And that's really not you. So what is you that makes you different? And I always tell people, be yourself, because everybody else is taken. How many times you've had people introduce themselves and they sound like maybe the last 2 or 3 people you've talked to, right? So again, come up with a value proposition that makes an impact, that really says a little bit about your background and who you are. And we'll talk about some before and after value proposition statements. So one executive that I met a couple of years ago, CEO in transition, this was her response, right? And after doing some homework on her, looking at her background and everything else, I said, this is a standard response, right? To me, it's boring. I'm sleepy, right? Because I've heard this at least from 3 or 4 other CEOs. and it's a little bit lengthy, right? So I said, you know, based on your background, based upon what makes you unique, you've got a psychological education background. That's unique from a CEO's perspective, because don't people in your particular industry make a lot of decisions based upon data, psychological inputs, their gut feel? Yeah. So I said, well, why isn't this you right here? Because this tells me that you help develop people, you coach people, you also focus on the top and the bottom line, which is always important from a company. And to me, that makes you a little bit different. Took a couple of minutes for us to create that, right? But the point is, it makes it different. That person owns it. They came off with a lot of energy, as opposed to kind of sounding, like I said, the Charlie Brown teacher. It's all monotone. There's no passion in that. That's one example for a value proposition. The other one was actually had a CFO. This is the standard response. I've worked in these 4 industries. I'm a CFO financial leader. Well, you know what? I could probably find 5 other people that way as well. So again, tell me a little bit about your background. What is something on your LinkedIn, or that's not on your LinkedIn profile, that's not in your resume, that resonates with you, that maybe that's something that you're passionate about? Well, you know what? I started playing the drums when I was a teenager, and I love that. I do that as a recreation. Okay, how can we roll that into a value proposition that makes sense for a financial person, right? And this is what we created. The person's a drummer, because from a drummer's perspective, they come in, they assess, they set the pace, they set the method, they collaborate, they bring all the departments together and focus on the growth of an organization, the profitability. That to me is a little bit more passionate about. You can get excited. And if that person has a musical background, boom, instant connection, right? And then the last one from a value proposition, and I would have to say, this is probably the best value propositions that I've seen in 5 years that I've been networking with people, talking with a nurse who was in transition. I said, you got to come up with something that really kind of just hits me, bang. What makes you different? Because there's a lot of nurses out there, they do a lot of different things. And what did she say? I catch babies. And to me, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I can see exactly what you do, what you need. And I also probably know some people that are in that industry that you can work focused, boom. So again, have a little bit of fun with it. I think a lot of times when we come into networking, we're very rigid, we're very uncomfortable, right? And we'll get a little bit into how do we transition out of that? Because for myself, 5 years ago, if you can believe it, I was an introvert as well. Didn't like networking, didn't find the value in it, didn't really realize the value in it. But it really starts off with understanding and knowing your value proposition, how you come in, how you introduce yourself. Okay, so we talk about how do we create the roadmap for networking. So I always tell people there's definitely opportunities, not only in your target. So you identify something that you're passionate about. Maybe you're a CFO and you want to know more about technology and IT. So that maybe it's a target market that you want to start to network with people and talk to people, because then you can gain value, you can gain insight, education. And if at one point you get responsible for IT and you have to roll out a new ERP system, I reach out to my network. The other thing I tell people is that when you're talking to people and you're introducing, it's always the second part of that initial networking. You always end towards the end, say, how can I help you? And this is where a lot of people tend to, I would say, struggle, is knowing the ask. And actually, Karen said this earlier, know your ask. And too many people haven't developed that, right? So it kind of comes off as kind of maybe a little loose, and it doesn't really close a deal. You know, we're always talking about closing a deal. Well, I think, you know, part of networking is closing the end of that meeting on a high note. You know, here's what I'm looking at. Look, here's what I'm looking for. I can tell you in many ways when people tend to have that ask clarified, and you might be working, but I found people found their ideal job. Now, they love their job that they're doing, but they found it because they were networking. They found an opportunity they would have never found out about, never heard about. More than 70% of opportunities are found through networking, and a large percentage of those are never posted because it's through the network. So know your ask And also maybe no addition, which I say swim lanes, I always reference to. Here's my ideal position, what I'm looking for, or here's what I'm looking to network with. But then I'm also looking to network with folks in these particular industries, in these particular companies, but have that clarified so that when you get ready to sit down and network for the first time, it comes off as a really nice, smooth transition and process. And then you can also create a day in the life. I'm always about structure. Karen talked about my military days. That's where I came up with. You can always structure any particular thing, change anything in your day that can make you more successful going forward. And part of that is creating a networking day, a networking meeting structure that fills your requirements and also helps you still stay focused on your day job. Because people ask me, how do you do it all? A lot of processes, a lot of disciplines, a lot of cadence. And to me, it just becomes second nature. It's not something, a task that I do. It's not uncomfortable. It's just a process. So on the call today, we ask, how many people are extroverts and how many people are introverts? And do we know the difference? So generally, an extrovert is an outgoing, overtly expressive person, right? They have outgoing skills. They're very social. Life and soul of the party, socializer. There's all kinds of words to describe what an extrovert is, right? Then we have the introverts. So to me, the introverts are shy. They're the ones that are basically in a corner. That's kind of how I was. When I would go to parties, I could sit in a corner and not talk to anybody all day and be okay with that. But again, that's really not going to help anything, right? It's not going to help you advance, whether you're looking to advance in your career, you're looking at opportunities. So the question is are you the guy on the left or the guy on the right, way over there eating his hamburger by himself? I think we already asked that question. So what do you think the world is tailored to? And to me, it's definitely more of the charismatic, the outgoing, the one who shares stories, also has a common interest. You know, it's the people that generally pull you in versus kind of just you kind of walk by like I was in the corner, right? You just kind of walk by and keep walking, right? Because you're not talking, you're not engaging with people. How do we do that, right? Well, for me, when I was an introvert, I started off small. It's kind of how you wade into the pool versus when I was growing up, my parents taught me how to swim by just tossing me in the deep end. But if you're an introvert, you will never even get close to the pool to ever even get an opportunity. And I call the pool the networking pool, right? So there's a way to start off small. And actually, Karen talked about it earlier. She's talked about, you know, in the grocery line, ironically enough, in the coffee shop line, ironically enough, church, alumni. These are people that you have some knowledge already, some common interest, and it actually breaks down a little bit of the barrier so it's not so uncomfortable. Or if you've got introduced by somebody that you know really well, that can help you progress because networking is a learned skill. It's not somebody that some people do it, some people don't, and the people who don't never get there. It's a learned art and it's a learned skill. And the more you do it, the better off you do and the better off you get.
So George, why don't you tell everybody what is maybe one of the most unusual sort of connections that you've made in sort of an unusual venue that was like, wow, that was interesting. Can you think of one that from your past? I'm sure you can.
Ooh, actually, you know, back to the coffee shop. So, you know, I'm a kind of guy that I'm okay just staying in my own frame, right? So actually just had a conversation talking with somebody a couple weeks prior to this, and this happened 3 years ago. Said, hey, you know what? Why don't you just strike up a conversation in the coffee shop? I'm like, really? That's just so uncomfortable. And I'm sure people feel kind of intruded, right? You know, I'm in my personal space, right? So I said, okay, I'm always willing to take the dare. You know, it's kind of the military in me to jump out of the plane and stuff like that. So I sat in a coffee shop and I said, okay. And I just picked a random person right in front of me. because he was talking to somebody else. He seemed to be a little bit more outgoing. I said, hey, how are you? You know, how's your day? Ironically enough, the gentleman was a president of an organization, 3 or 4 companies that he managed, and we got to talk. Would I have ever gotten to meet that person? First of all, no, if I didn't get a little bit outgoing and get a little bit out of my comfort zone. But the second thing was, is we developed a relationship over the past 3 or 4 years where on a cadence basis, every 3 or 4 months, either I will reach out to him or he reaches out to me. And it's just, you know, once you've established that connection, then you talk about how do I keep that cadence, right? Sometimes you can talk to people every day, which I've done. Other people talk on a monthly or quarterly basis, while others I maybe talk 2 or 3 years. But the point is, and it's back to that one and done, you got to at least get it out there, first of all. And then it's easier, as Ann Pryor talks about tilling her garden every Sunday night. She walks in, she looks at people that she hasn't talked to in a couple of months, and she reaches out to them people. How are you doing? What's going on? That's all about networking and keeping your networking thriving. Have connections introduce you. We talked about this, right? It's great if you know Karen very well, like I do, is, hey, Karen, reached out and say, you know, we haven't talked to in a couple of months. I'm looking for some connections in this particular company, and I see that, you know, you're connected to Fred. Would you be open to introduce Fred? You've already broken down a barrier because you've got an in with somebody who's really connected with them, but also there's a little bit less tension because you've got a common discussion. Hey, how do you know Karen? How long have you known Karen? And that kind of eases and what I call melts the whole uncomfortableness of the cold networking meeting. Learn to act like a likable person, right? I can tell you that for my entire life, people always told me, George, you got to smile more. And I think it's because of my military days. If you've known and seen any videos, the drill sergeants always tell you, what are you smiling at? What do you know? So you're taught not to smile. So it took me years to turn around and just remind myself all the time, you got to smile more, you got to smile more. But that's inviting. You tend to gravitate to people who have a little bit more energy, enthusiasm, positive attitude. No one wants to talk to a New York. How many people have sat across and networked with somebody, and the first thing they start off, oh God, you know, this networking meeting is really, or they talk about their career transition. I've been out for 6 months, and it's like, yeah, I'm uncomfortable. I wish this networking was over with. Meeting was already over with, right? So again, find the traits to be a likable person. Again, find the things that make you, and bring those out. Said, be yourself. And the other thing is, as we talked earlier about in one value proposition, if you're doing the homework the night before, we'll talk about that a little bit later, is how do you connect with somebody? You know, I've always told my kids, I always wished I spent time earlier on in my life to learn the piano or et cetera. So all my kids know an instrument, right? And you know as well as I do, if somebody turns around and starts walking, they walk up to, like, say, the Rochester Hospital down there, the Mayo Clinic, and they've got that big piano, and somebody just walks up and starts playing the piano. How many people gravitate to that type of person, right? Just find some way to connect. So, you know, you say, well, yeah, I've got a day job. I don't know how I can fit all this in. How do you fit it all in? So for me, it's a daily plan, right? It's a daily, a weekly, and monthly plan. How do you progress your networking? How do you build your networking up? You know, so for example, a couple of things I do in the morning before work. Most days when people reach out to me, I always say 7:15. You got to be an early bird. By 7:15, I've already ran 5 miles, meditated, and done morning affirmations. Right? Probably more than most people have done all day. That's kind of the old Army way. But one other thing is we do coffee drive-throughs. So this is where you guys meet up at a coffee parking lot. Each goes through the coffee, and you kind of park opposite, socially distance, and talk. Very few people do that, but when you talk about that, they're like, hey, that's pretty cool. You know, we're still distance. I'm in my car, you're in your car. It makes it work. Actually, Lenny Newman and I do that quite often. We'll just meet at his old Caribou hangout, and we'll grab coffee together and we'll just talk. Zoom team meetings. The thing is that now people don't actually have to get into a car, schedule time, drive out of their way and sit down in front of you, which it also makes it an opportunity easier to just get on a Zoom call, quick, have a 15-minute introduction and talk. Again, some people actually schedule their days, for maybe Tuesdays and Thursdays, lunchtime. They've got a 45-minute lunch. They'll eat lunch in 20 minutes and they'll network with one or two a week. Scheduling meetings. One of the things I've also done is cold calls. I actually cold called on a dare. So I actually had one person when we were talking and we were following up in our networking meetings. The person said, hey, you know what, George, why don't you try cold calling CEOs? I'm like, does that really work anymore? He's like, well, you know as well as I do, they're real busy. He said, so you got to make sure that your message is clear and concise. And so we talked about that for a while. And I said, okay, so basically what you're telling me is I've got to give them a taste of the cake without giving them the entire ingredients so that they want to call back for the ingredients. Yeah, that's actually good. So long story short, I reached out to 10 CEOs in the Minneapolis area, and 7 of them returned my call within 2 or 3 days max, which I was floored, right? And my message was, hey, this is George Murray. I'm a recently transitioning executive where I took a company from 100 to 180 million in 18 months. I'm looking to network in the medium to large business community and would love your advice. Click. Less than 30 seconds. And the first person to call me back was Doug Baker of Echo Labs. This was 2016. The CEO was taking in a big, considerable amount of salary and running a $1 billion organization. And I was honored that he would call me back. So again, try things, try new things, come out of your comfort zone. You'll be surprised the responses that you get. And then what I've also told people is network within your organizations. If your organizations are large enough, for example, one of the people that I talked with in the coaching sessions that I had was that they were really unhappy in their current role at the company. Company is a multi-billion-dollar company, right? I said, how many people at your level, your peers, do you know in the other organizations? Very few. I'm like, well, why don't you start networking in your organization? Reach out, see how you can help them. Maybe you can do some work share, something like that. Long story short, in that process, in about 6 months, he found an opportunity to work and move into another division and remain into the company many more years afterwards, where he was really unhappy. He was looking to jump ship. It's an opportunity to turn around and also network within an organization and also expand your skills, your knowledge, and potentially maybe your career.
Hey, George, another question came in the chat here, if you don't mind me interrupting here. So George Bayagis, who has been a prior president of our chapter, I'm sure you've met George over the years, maybe you have. So George had a question for George. So now that your book's published, do you have any things that you wish you had included in your book that now obviously it's a done deal or whatever? Did anything kind of strike you after the fact and go, man, I wish I had talked about something or given that example or put in that chapter or something like that?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact, a couple of things that got into the book as it was going to publishing, which was towards the end, I talked about the pandemic, right? So I had an opportunity to get a little bit of information in there prior to the book publishing. A couple of things post that I didn't put in there, I think really is those 3 stages of career transition. I think it's so important to first people to understand those, but then also how do I progress? What's it take me to get out of the rut I'm in, get into that transformational stage, and then finally that confidence stage. So I think that's one. I think another thing is that, some more tools that I've created over time since the book's been published, right? As I'm networking with a lot of folks, and I would say a high percentage of them are executives in career transition at all levels, is really just helping them navigate it even faster and quicker, right? I mean, the sad thing is career transition is kind of like trial and error, right? I met so many great people. I tell people, the book is an EOS model of career transition. I didn't come up with all those ideas. It was basically, 40 of these books that I sat down with people and they gave me nuggets of advice. Like Steve Stope talked about, what we talked about is that, or we will talk about is, reaching out and updating your network 2 or 3 times a year, just to say, hey, this is what I'm doing and my status, and would love to get an update. A brief 400 word, don't make it a book, don't make it a novel, but that's another way to keep your networking growing. So those are a couple of opportunities that I wish were in the book.
No, that's terrific. So we only have about 5 minutes. I know the time has gone super fast. So if you want to just cover any of the key elements that you think people should know, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. So I'm going to go back through these really quick, but this is a weekly plan. It's a stop, start, continue model. Evaluate what's going on in your life. You might want to turn around and back off, but don't ever stop networking. You might want to reach out to, just 1 or 2 a particular week, adjust those. I've always developed templates that made it easier and quicker to introduce myself and be responsive. The other thing is a monthly, as I talked about. Maybe what you want to do in order to stay top of mind with your entire network is send them a brief update individually and say, listen, here's a couple of things that I've been doing, and maybe some opportunity that you're looking for, right? And reaching out to your network will help that process a lot shorter. Again, personal board of advisors, these are 3 to 5 people that are definitely not all in your particular background. They're not all CFOs or financial people. To me, my personal board range from LinkedIn experts to financial consultant to what I would call an energy coach, and then just a real good friend that basically held me accountable to my daily tasks. And I tell people, work many angles, go direct. Do a cold call, master the cold call. There's some things out there that, doing letters, sending letters for people who are recently promoted in the Star Tribune section of the business section every Monday identifies. Send them an introduction. Say, hey, listen, congratulations, couple of lines, and then say, hey, I'd like to have 15, 20 minutes. I can tell you I did that for 10 weeks to really launch my pipeline of networking. And out of that 500 people representing 10 a day, for 5 weeks, or excuse me, for 10 weeks, 50 a week, I was able to network face-to-face, when we could do face-to-face, over 400 of those people. And the response was, no one ever sends me a letter anymore. I get spam mail and bills, never a letter. So again, another way to make yourself different and unique and stand out. Prepare for your meeting. Karen talked about this. It's so important to do homework the night before. My process was each page in my little black books or my little blue books that said, here's the name, how many common connections, 3 or 4 of those people that I know well that can start off that conversation. And then the process should be a 70-30 split. Let them talk 70% of the time. People like people who listen. And we're in an environment where we listen to respond. So if you're truly listening, taking notes, and you follow up and say, I appreciate your time today, thank you. And more importantly, maybe talk about a highlight that they spoke about, that tells them that, hey, this person was genuinely interested in me and they remembered it and they took notes. Best way, one of the things you have every day, if your LinkedIn profile, you got an opportunity. People talk about their promotions that they got, their new jobs they've got, and their birthdays. Don't hit the standard happy birthday. Be a little bit creative. I tell people, take a little bit of effort, create a template, put it on your calendar. You change that every 9 months so you don't overlap and send the same one every year. But be a little bit different that says, hey, wish them well, wish them specifically something. And then if you're looking to network, maybe it's an opportunity to reconnect over the past year. Hey, you know what? I haven't talked to Karen in over a year. Let me get her on the calendar. Her birthday was today. All right. And tell people, about their promotion. And then, follow-up is so important. Get introduced, make sure that you respond. Thank the person that if they introduced you to them, also thank them, but also make sure that you thank the person with an email and a note, as we talked about earlier. Top of mind, 5 to 8 weeks if you're in career transition, at least 2 to 3 times during the year if you're in your career, just to keep top of mind and keep your network always relevant. And so the summary goes, before you go out, go all on the left, and when you're out, go all on the right, and you will be a much better networker. And for those who are interested in a career transition, I actually have a workshop now created on the book. And like I said earlier, Minneapolis Community College reached out to me, went through the process. And now we'll be at the end of April. It'll be a part of the workshop standing every twice a month. We'll be doing it.
Thanks so much, George. We really appreciate you talking today. Everyone will enjoy the book. And I encourage all of you, when you read George's book, give him some feedback. Network with him, reach out to him, connect with him on LinkedIn. You'll love his LinkedIn site. It is amazing. Lots of recommendations that he's given and received. So I think it's really kind of a model for how to use LinkedIn, really. But connect with him and let him know what you think about the book. I'm sure he'd appreciate the feedback. So thanks everybody for joining us today. And thanks, George, so much.
Thank you, Karen.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. This does end the webinar. Your CPE credits will be available in 7 to 10 business days. We wish you the best of the day. Thank you.